Welcome to our Google Plus Hangout, celebrating 125 years of exploration.
Hello, hello to all you brain geeks out there tuning in for the Brain Games Hangout today. We have kind of a loosely structured thing prepared for you with three participants, including me. I'm Ginny Hughes, the blogger from National Geographic's Phenomena Science Salon. I write about the brain and genetics and other human stuff. And so with me today we have Jason Silva, who's the host of National Geographic's Brain Games, really popular TV show. Hi, Jason.
Hi, how's it going? Great to be here, guys.
Yeah. And then we also have Amy Robinson, who is a creative director at MIT.
Wow.
She works in a computational neuroscience lab. Hi, Amy.
Hello. Hi, everyone. How's it going?
Good. So Amy's in her apartment in Cambridge, near Boston, and Jason, you're in Manhattan at the Nat Geo offices, right?
That's right. They were kind enough to give me a room to do the hangout from.
It looks very bright and cheery in there.
Right. Yes. This is a nice light coming in, so hopefully I don't look dark. Good. Yeah.
Awesome. All right. So today we're supposed to talk about how the brain works and other cool stuff about the brain. And I hear that, Jason, you wanted to start by trying to trick me and Amy.
Yes. I mean, first I'd love to tell you just a little bit about brain games in general for those who haven't seen the show. But so you know, Brain Games is an interesting experiment because it's this pop science series about the brain that basically uses these kind of perceptual experiments, these kind of brain hacks and optical illusions and so on and so forth to basically create a crack in your perception of reality. I mean, we want the show, through the use of these games, to create a feeling of doubt in people, to highlight the kind of the shortcomings in how your brain perceives reality. And through that kind of feeling of just, wow, what you see is not always what you get, hopefully it serves as a hook to make you want to learn about your brain and about neuroscience. You know what I mean? Because I mean, on the one hand, the brain is the most complicated object in the known universe, right? We haven't found anything that is more complex than the human brain, and yet it's also surprisingly easy to fool. So I think that is a kind of interesting juxtaposition. There's such complexity, but then at the same time, there's all these ways in which we can highlight the ways in which the brain is limited. And I think it's very relevant because, you know, you have Obama's brain mapping initiative going on. You have the in Europe they're spending $1 billion to reverse engineer the brain. So, you know, the brain is hot stuff. You know, there's a lot we don't know about the brain, but there's more and more than we do know about it. And so that's why I'm very just excited to be, you know, doing this show and putting out, you know, more and more of these brainy notions into the world. So it's good.
Yeah. So do you think, what do you think do you think the average person is just like automatically interested and curious about how the brain works, or is it like, oh, neuroscience, that's really tough? And
well, that's a very fair question. I mean, I think that human beings are very curious. You know, I think if you aggregate all of humanity and you look at our story of exploration from the beginning and from the dawn of man, and we have this kind of cosmic restlessness and this insatiable curiosity that is the reason that we consistently just transcend our boundaries. You know, we didn't stay within the caves. We haven't stayed within the planet. I mean, that's kind of what it is to be human, is to discover and to sort of explore and transcend. But at the same time, you know, in our day-to-day lives, you know, as Ernest Becker used to say, we tranquilize ourselves with trivialities. So the day-to-day things that we have to do in our lives sometimes keep us from sitting back and being like, how does consciousness work? How does self-awareness work? You know, how does this, you know, piece of meat inside my skull lead to a sense of self, lead to a voice in my head that lets me know that I even exist? You know, it's kind of wild, you know. And so I think that what I care about is using media, or finding ways of using content to kind of elicit that wonder and that awe from people, to make them, you know, to shake them out of their comfort zone, to pull them out of context, so that they're like, okay, yes, there is this fascinating thing called the brain, and there is science, and there's all, and make them interested. You know, that's kind of my thing. And so that's what we're trying to do with brain games, is to do that, to shake people up and to be like, hey, look at this fascinating thing, and look at all the flaws it has, and look at all the wonders it has, and wake up, you know?
All right. Well, you should wake us up then, right now. I wanna get shaken up.
Yes, sure. Well,
So let's see this thing you want to trick us with.
So, okay, so one of the things that we do on the show is that, we have to adapt these real lab experiments and make them into games, because, people at home want to have fun when they watch the show, and they want to do stuff that they can then do at cocktail parties, and these sort of little brain tricks that we do. But they're actually kind of fascinating because they have always these profound takeaways, and so they highlight stuff that's really fascinating, even if it seems like, oh, this is just a little trick. It's pretty profound, because it gives you an insight into how your brain works. So one of the things that we talk about is how your brain can be primed, and your brain is consistently looking to connect the dots. Your brain receives incomplete information from the world, and it wants to do its best to complete that information, to complete the pattern. But it often does so erroneously. You often miss key details from the world and from the information you're receiving, because you're very quickly just trying to find the pattern as efficiently as possible and complete the pattern. So here's a riddle that uses that idea. And so what we'll do is we'll ask you the question, and then we'll ask people to tweet at Nat Geo, as well as to send comments here in the chat box to what they think the answer is. Okay, so let's do one of these and see if it works. You walk into a room with a match, a kerosene lamp, and a candle, and you see a fireplace. Which should you light first? So again, this is your brain. Your brain is receiving this information, and it has to find an answer as quickly as possible. It's doing that by looking for patterns and completing patterns. But let's see if it actually missed any key details in the question. I can ask it again if you want.
Yeah, let's hear it again.
So you walk into a room with a match, a kerosene lamp, and a candle, and then you see a fireplace. Which should you light first? Are people tweeting at Nat Geo?
They should. They should tweet
Okay.
at Nat Geo, and I think they can also put their answers on Google+.
Yes.
Right? Yeah. What do you think, Amy?
Oh my gosh, I don't know. I'm thinking, if you light the fire first, then you can with it light the match and then light the kerosene candle.
Yes.
But how do you light a fire without a match?
Now, I'll give you guys a clue. People are probably sending in their answers right now, but these riddles are worded in a specific way to highlight the way your brain is very quickly looking to complete a pattern without really taking in the details of the question. So, are we waiting to get some answers, or should I actually tell you the answers?
Don't tell the answer.
Okay.
I think we're going to wait till the end of the Hangout and then try to aggregate the answers. And see what people
here,
say.
I'll ask you another one that we've done on TV before, so maybe it would be easier for people to know it, but I just think it'll be fun to ask. So, Mary's mother has 4 daughters: April, May, June, and
Mary.
What's the Okay, well you're catching on to me, but again, people hear the pattern. People hear the pattern.
I was gonna say July.
There you go. People hear April, May, and June, and what comes after April, May, and June? July. They'll answer the pattern without paying attention to what the question is. The question is not saying what comes after April, May, and June in the months of the year. The question is, Mary's mother has 4 daughters: April, May, and June. That's 3 of them. But obviously, if Mary's mother is Mary is one of them, and so most people won't get that. Again, the brain is quick to complete an incomplete pattern without taking into account the full question that's being asked. And this happens all the time. And of course, these are fun and people get tricked. But again, the profound takeaway here is how many times does this happen in your day-to-day life? How many times do you get information from the world and make inferences about the world and make guesstimations about the world that are completely inaccurate? This happens all the time. And I think that's fascinating.
Yeah, even in the history of science, right? I mean, there are so many times when researchers and scientists, hundreds of years in the past, have been working towards scientific theories that were just wrong, without actually questioning the theories themselves, without actually making what were the revolutionary paradigm shifts that led them to really solve the challenges.
Absolutely. I remember in our episode on perception, we were talking about, we all go through life feeling pretty confident that our kind of daily rendering of this 3D world that we live in is sort of accurate representation of that world, or that it's an accurate experience of said world. But you know that through our eyes, we actually only receive low-resolution 2D images. Like our eyes are like low-res, flat 2D cameras. And then our brain takes that raw information and then renders a high-def 3D rendering of the world based on that limited information. So we really kind of do live in a matrix in the sense that we interface and interact with a representation of the world that by many accounts is not a complete picture of what's out there. And I think that's fascinating. How much of our brain is filling in the blanks? Our brain creates reality, and we bring to that reality all of our preconceptions, expectations, stereotypes, past experiences. In many instances, we see what we want to see. And I think that's just fascinating. And then,
But so, Jason, can you tell us why our brain is so stupid? Like, why do we fill in the blanks, and why did we evolve to think like this?
Well, it's not that it's so stupid or that it's so amazing. It's that it's both. It's amazing and dazzling and complex, but it's a machine. And so a machine is trying to be efficient. It's trying to use less energy. It's trying to limit its bandwidth. I mean, think of, for example, why we compress video to make it flow on the internet. People talk about H.264 compression or MPEG compression. It takes digital information and it literally grabs only the elements that the eye can see so that it can shrink the file size of video. And so when you watch HD movie trailers on YouTube, you're not really seeing like an uncompressed high-definition picture. You're seeing a representation that's highlighting elements of it that your brain will not be able to tell the difference, but that's kind of the same thing your brain does with reality. Your brain cannot take in all the information that possibly could come in through its senses, so it makes inferences based on the limited information that it can perceive. Like, It's just like, because the world out there is sort of infinite, right? And our brains are, fixed. Our biological brains are fixed. So at least until we have some kind of technological singularity or human tech sort of co-evolve, symbiosis that allows us to extend the capacities of the brain beyond their current limits, we have true, bandwidth limitations. It's like your brain is like a 56K modem, and we're trying to take in like HD video, 24 frames per second. It's impossible.
Right. So we're just very selective.
We have to be. It's a sort of adaptation. I think it's fascinating. We had another riddle here. Should we read another riddle?
Yeah.
Okay. So a farmer had 15 sheep, and all but 8 died. How many are left?
Well, it can't be 7 because that's what my brain
immediately
thinks it is.
But did you listen to the question?
I thought I did. Yeah. Say it again. Ask it again.
So a farmer had 15 sheep, and all but 8 died. How many are left?
Oh, 8.
Duh.
Duh. Oh, burn. Wow. So
your brain went straight to like, what was the challenge? Oh, I have to do a subtraction. Okay, it had 15 and then all but 8. You didn't hear all but 8. You said 8. You heard 8. You heard that 8 died. You didn't hear that all but 8 died. You didn't realize that the answer was written into the question. Instead, you went ahead and filled the pattern and did the subtraction and gave us the answer that you assumed was the answer. Which I think, again, it's the same example of the same thing happening there.
Right. So how do you think we can, are there tips you have for how we can try to transcend these natural limits on our brain, or how do we become better?
Well, sure. I think that one of the things that people often ask on, when they watch the show, they're like, oh my God, that show, I can't believe my brain is so silly, or my brain is so stupid. And we tell people, no, it's not that. These tricks are meant to highlight shortcomings in how you perceive reality. But I think that one of the cool things is that in a way knowledge is power. So upon realizing that you have these shortcomings, it might make you pay a little bit more attention to your day-to-day reality. You realize that the world is a little bit more ambiguous and that your interpretation of said world is a little more ambiguous than what you thought it is. Then maybe it makes you open your eyes a little bit. There's that beautiful line that says we have eyes yet see not, ears that hear not, and hearts that neither feel nor understand. We go through life in a state of kind of like autopilot. We're kind of half asleep. there's this idea of hedonic adaptation, and that anything we get used to, we hardly pay attention to because we're kind of relying on these mental map models of the world, and we assume there's nothing new to discover, and so we run on autopilot. And I think that one of the exciting things about a show like Brain Games, and also the content that I make on the web, is that it's meant to shake you up a little bit. And when you're shaken up a little bit, all of a sudden the world becomes new again. Becomes interesting, it becomes wonderful. It becomes the way the way a child looks upon the world, with a constant state of grace and wonder. That's kind of the point. And so I think it has to do with constantly reminding yourself that that reality is kind of it's not as your fixed perceptions of reality are not as fixed as you think they are. And I think that you're reminded of that anytime you get on a plane and go somewhere new, anytime you collide against a different culture, anytime you're really pulled out of context in a dramatic manner and you're forced to see the world in a new way. I think that's a healthy thing.
Yeah.
You have a really amazing video on the biological benefits of awe. It's one of my favorite ones that you've ever done. And there's the one line in there where you have something about, when you look into the heavens, you're taking in basically the entire of the universe through your optic nerve.
Don't you love that? Oh, I love that. I love that. Yeah, well, I read this book by Nicholas Humphrey that actually said that the human mind, the human brain's unique capacity to be awestruck was something that was evolutionarily advantageous because it imbued our life with a sense of cosmic significance and meaning. In other words, the unique sort of human ability to just contemplate, to marvel, to awe, made us feel like we had some special significance in the world beyond just mere biological survival. And so that idea that there was something more to us, that we had a higher purpose, our ability to be awestruck, he says resulted in a species that worked harder than just to survive, a species that felt it had to thrive. And that he says that unique quirk, this guy Humphrey that wrote the book, is responsible for us building rockets and skyscrapers and smartphones. I mean, such an interesting species we are. And I remember this guy Ross Anderson, who's a wonderful writer for The Atlantic, wrote an article about the Hubble Space Telescope and the new James Webb Telescope, and he talked about, that line was from his article, he says that with instruments like the Hubble, just like with telescopes and microscopes and any other technological instrument that we use to extend the boundaries of our perception, he refers to these instruments as technological scaffoldings that extend the boundaries of the brain. You could argue that we dovetail our cognitive capacities to our tools. We outsource our memories to these extended minds, but in other ways, the Hubble, is an extension of our neocortex. It's an extension of the human eyeball, and the Hubble is the eyeball of mankind. And with it, we're able to mainline the whole of time through the optic nerve. I mean, think of that idea. And that's what human beings do. That's what we do with these brains, and that's something that I'm really interested in. So besides learning about the sort of limited perceptual qualities of the brain, which we learn about on Brain Games, we also realize that it's because we have these limitations that we've had this kind of desire to transcend those limitations with our instruments. There is no animal that uses tools the way we do to extend its cognitive capacities, and I think that's really fascinating. That's what I'm really interested in, even beyond Brain Games.
That is interesting. So I think we've got a poster here to go back to the how easily we're fooled. Apparently, there's a poster that has a sentence on it that shows us.
Yeah. So when we see it on screen, everybody should read this out loud to themselves.
Out loud to themselves.
Yeah. Just read it out loud. Everybody at home, when we see it on screen, everybody should read it and see if there's anything wrong with that sentence.
Even the sharpest mind can be fooled. There are certain things that the average reader will overlook. Even if you're paying extra attention, you may not notice simple mistakes. You may not notice simple mistakes.
There you
and
go.
the average reader.
There you go.
Oh.
But we were looking for the mistakes, so that's probably...
We did this experiment on the show as well, and this again has to do with your brain wants to extrapolate information from the world as quickly as possible, right? It's very quickly just wants to, what's the conclusion here? And so in a sense, in this case, it's not really expecting to find a mistake, and so it doesn't. And so it sees a few of the words, it glances through the sentence, and it just sort of assumes that what it says there is what Amy read. until the second time around where she caught the error. That's kind of interesting, you know, that things can be like blatantly written incorrectly, but you'll still read them correctly. It's kind of amazing.
Yeah, that is amazing. I think one of the coolest things about brain games is the interaction you have with the audience.
Yeah.
And Amy, I heard a little bit about this program that you're doing that also is all about like getting people to connect with science in a really accessible way. It's called Eyewire, right? EYE.
Right. EYE.
So what is Eyewire?
Right, yeah. So Eyewire is a game to map the brain. It's created from Sebastian Sung's computational neuroscience lab at MIT. And so we're interested in studying connectomics, which looks at how neurons connect together to form networks that process information. And this theory is that you are your connectome. So there's 85 billion neurons in one brain with roughly the same order of magnitude number of synapses in your one brain as there are stars in the universe. And these synapses are constantly changing, but we've never really mapped a brain. We've never even mapped a mouse brain. The only thing we've ever mapped is C. elegans, which is a worm, 1 millimeter long worm, and it took 12 years to map that.
Wow.
Yeah, 12 years. And so it's taking so long because of a technology bottleneck. So it currently takes us 50 hours to reconstruct one cell.
Whoa.
One cell, and there's 85 billion in one brain. So we drew inspiration from Angry Birds and Candy Crush and all these viral, addicting online games. People spend 3 billion hours every week playing games online. So we decided to make a game interface over what we do as a lab, which is discovering new neural networks and understanding how the brain processes information. So we built Eyewire, and we have now 70,000 people who've joined since we launched.
70,000?
70,000
Wow.
people from 133 countries, actually. Who've joined since we launched in December, and they're reconstructing neural networks. They're actually helping us understand how vision information processing works. So we're looking at how we perceive motion. And so in the short term, these gamers are actually discovering never before mapped neural networks.
Wow.
And in the long term, all the actions of players in Eyewire is being used for advanced machine learning that will help create software that will help researchers more rapidly reconstruct neural networks and kind of thus make faster new discoveries about how the brain works.
Wow. So if I want to play, is it eyewire.com?
Oh, yeah, eyewire.org. Yep, it's
.org.
EYEWIRE.org.
Cool. Well, we've been getting some questions from viewers. So I think first we're going to do a video question for Jason.
Hi Jason, my name is Taylor and I am 9 years old. Because of my favorite show, Brain Games, I was the only one in 3rd grade to pass a follow the directions test. The first direction on the test said to read through all the directions before starting the test. All of the other kids started doing the test before reading through everything. I was the only one to do it correctly. I learned this from the Battle of the Sexes episode of Brain Games. And my question for you is, why can I remember something when I was 2, but I can't remember what I ate for dinner last night?
That's a really good question. I've thought about that before.
Why
our memory holds on to that.
Wow, what a smart kid. Yeah, so he's referring to that thing where you're supposed to read all the instructions, and then after all the questions at the bottom, it says don't answer any of the questions. Everybody would have gone through it. So again, he's smart, and I love that he took notes from that episode. That's brilliant. I have to be honest, I don't have an answer to his question, and I was actually trying to do some research recently about that, and apparently we don't really know why that's the case. Although I can make a kind of poetic inference, which is I think that things that are really, really, really meaningful and resonate, maybe they kind of stay, right? If they resonate, it's like they carve themselves inside of you. Meaningful experiences tend to not be forgotten as easily as sort of, maybe what he had for dinner was kind of boring last night or something. But again, that's not a scientific explanation. That's like the poetic account of why I think that's the case. But maybe you can answer it. You're the brain expert.
Well, actually, what you said does have some research behind it, where you know, for instance, when people study post-traumatic stress disorder, whenever there's a really strong emotional experience, it does actually cement the circuits in the amygdala and other parts of the brain. So, yeah, you're totally right.
I mean, I know that for me, when I stumble upon a piece of content that inspires me, I want to literally like swallow the content. Like I want to download it. It's this, I become obsessed with beautiful passages, lines, ideas, quotes, because I sort of want them to become part of my collective unconscious so that they're always there and they become just like referential, you know, things that I come back to again and again. And I'm one of those people that when something resonates, I have anxiety about it not resonating. So it becomes something where it's like I need to be reminded of this every single day, and because of that very reason, I don't want to forget. You know, that's a scary idea.
Yeah. Okay, we've got another live question. This one is from Rajdeep Nair on Google+. He says, "Does déjà vu really exist?"
Well, it's certainly an experience that we have.
Right.
Know? So, I mean,
so perceptually it exists.
As a subjective experience, I definitely think that is a phenomenon that we can all attest to, just like dreams. Do dreams really exist? Well, it's like, you know, subjectively we can all vouch that they do.
Right.
I don't know how déjà vu is explained at the sort of level of neurochemistry in your brain. Maybe Amy does.
I do not know. I do not know. There are so many interesting questions that we're unable to answer about how the brain works. I mean, we just put it in perspective. You know, we can, you know, make movies like IBM's Little Boy and His Atom, literally, you know, nano movies, and we can grow organs. I know, right? And we can skydive from space, but we don't even know how many different types of cells there are in our own heads. It's like the greatest mystery is so close to home that it is home. And I think it's really interesting to kind of bring these kind of questions to light because we don't know the answers yet, but we will.
Yeah, well, in Europe, they're spending $1 billion. The people behind the Large Hadron Collider are spending $1 billion to reverse engineer the brain. I mean, the goal here is to emulate a mind on a digital substrate. So we're talking about a non-biological intelligence to create sentience, awareness, consciousness in a non-biological space. Now that is referred to as a technological singularity because the moment that we can do that, that non-biological brain wouldn't have the limitations of the hardware that our biological brains do. So it would basically, the moment that we give birth to a consciousness that we can endlessly upgrade, you know, by putting more RAM in it, that will be the human epoch will have ended. I mean, that will be the next stage in evolution. That will be the other that is birthed from humanity. And ultimately, I think it's something that's very exciting because we can merge with that intelligence. I mean, I think it's us. People talk about, oh, this scary AIs, these digital brains. No, that's us. That's an extension, a scaffolding of humanity. And I'm particularly excited about that. I think that's the future of brain and mind. What do you think about that?
I think that's pretty wild. You start talking about singularity, we're going to get all kinds of crazy people on writing in. So I wanted to ask you to make sure before we run out of time to tell us what a doodle is.
Yes, absolutely. In our episode on creativity, we were comparing children and adults. And how, you know, adults, they come to rely on these kind of mental maps and these like neural pathways that they've kind of cemented over time. Whereas whereas children approach the world sort of fresh and they're ready to make more interesting connections. That's why we say that children are more creative. So a doodle is a term for what is basically a drawing and a doodle together. And what we ask people to do is to look at these ambiguous figures, these doodles, and to ask adults and then children, tell us all the things that you see here. And there are no right or wrong answers. The idea is how many different possible scenarios, how many things do you see in this ambiguous doodle? And what we found is that children see a lot more than adults do. Children are willing to take sort of more creative risks in more imaginative leaps, and so they see more in these doodles. So if you want to put one on screen and we can ask people to tweet at Nat Geo or right here on Google+, what do they see? Tell us all of the things that this doodle can be, all of the scenarios that you can describe it as.
What do you think, Amy? What do you see?
It reminds me of Looney Tunes cartoons. I guess with the Roadrunner guy. I mean, it could be a teepee in a little cavern. It could be a
Yes.
mid-ocean ridge.
Yes. That's great. You're a creative girl, so go on. What else?
Oh my gosh, it could be a whale coming up and eating plankton out of the ocean.
There you go.
Oh my gosh,
Good one.
it could be a geometry math problem.
Yes.
Wow. It could be. Oh my gosh, someone else chime in.
I see a really scary cliff.
Yes.
Which, if you fell off of it, you would be skewered by a really sharp rock. What is that? This is like sort of Freudian or something. You could have a whole psychology experiment, sort of like the ink blot test.
Yeah, exactly. But it was funny to see the kids. They come up with such great stuff. But anyway, so we want to hear from people to send their answers to what they see here to @NatGeo, as well as you can tweet at us as well. I'm @JasonSilva, and you guys, if you want to continue the conversation after this, tell us what you see on the doodles. Tweet us.
Yeah, and we have the results now from the Riddle poll.
Oh, cool.
So, want to say the Riddle one more time, and then I'll tell you what percentage of people said what.
Yes, absolutely. So the first one we were looking at was you walk into a room with a match, a kerosene lamp, a candle, and you see a fireplace. Which should you light first?
Okay, so 82% of people out there watching this Hangout said match.
Oh, wow, brilliant. That's the right answer.
Yay!
Yes,
Then
yes.
10% said fireplace, 5% said candle, and 2.5% said the lamp.
Oh, wow. They all got it. So the majority of people realized that the counterintuitive answer was the most obvious one. It's like, duh, you got to light the match before anything else gets lit. So what were you expecting them? What were you expecting? Well, okay, so you walk into a room with a match, and then you mention a kerosene lamp, a candle, and a fireplace. You would expect that at that point, after listing 4 things, people would have forgotten that a match is required to be lit, and they would have just thought totally randomly, oh, well, should you light the lamp first, or the candle first, or the fireplace first? And they would have given some arbitrary answer like, how about the fireplace? Or how about the candle? Like, they would have just, like, said whatever they think should be lit first without realizing that the match is kind of a prerequisite to lighting anything. So the match is obviously the answer, but people would have not realized that there was a distinction between match and the other 4 things.
Gotcha. Okay. Is that what you thought, Amy? Match?
Yeah, what did I say in the beginning? I think a fireplace, because you could use it to light other things, but how would you light a fireplace? Unless you're a dragon or something.
All right, great. Well, I think we just have one last question, and then we'll wrap up.
Awesome.
So Akshay Ramrika from Malaysia asked on Google+, Jason, can you list 5 situations in our daily lives in which we encounter these kinds of illusions or tricks?
Yeah, I mean, every time you open your eyes and you walk around your room and you walk to the bathroom and you just check, you experience this 3D world, this solid world, and you trust your inferences about that world. You are really relying on your brain's sort of representation or interpretation of that limited information that it's receiving. Again, you don't see the world in 3D. You see low-resolution 2D images through your eyes. And then your brain takes that and then creates this mathematical construct, and it's like, well, this is what it would look like if it was in 3D. And then it's accurate enough that you don't crash into things, but still, you don't have a direct experience of that 3D reality. So for me, that's one of the most fascinating things. Now, it also has to do with what you pay attention to. Henry Miller had that great line. It says, even a blade of grass, if given proper attention, becomes a magnificent world in itself. So think of all the things that you walk by or you ignore on a daily basis. Oh, this boring piece of grass, or this like silly little lamp on my desk, or like, I mean, what Henry Miller is saying that is, anything that you give enough attention to becomes fascinating. I think it was Darwin that used to say that attention, if sudden and close, graduates into surprise, and this into astonishment, and this into stupefied amazement. So I would encourage people to try to their best to reorient what they pay attention to on a day-to-day basis, and they'll discover sort of a ubiquitous world of everyday wonders that we're culturally disposed to ignore and that we miss out on a day-to-day basis. That's what I would say.
That's good advice. I'm going to try to do that. I think it's probably easier said than done, but we can all try.
Yes. People would need to meditate.
Watch more Jason Silva videos. It'll get you there.
There you go.
Yeah, they're great. They're great. All right, well, that's it. We're going to wrap up. Thanks, everybody, for coming. I think it's been fun, and you can find Jason on Twitter, and you can find Amy on Twitter, you can find me on Twitter, and Facebook, and all the other social media out there. So thanks a lot. Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye. Bye, Amy.
Bye.